Yes.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Sorry about the delay. We had some technical difficulties that needed to be corrected. My name is Tim Freeman. I'm an associate architect for California Building Standards Commission. With me in the room this morning is Ms. Laura Mills, BSc Analyst 2, who is running the meeting in the background. Also with us are representatives from the Division of the State Architects, as well as representatives from other agencies who participate through Zoom. I'd like to welcome you to our first workshop of the Cal Green Carbon Reduction Collaborative, CCRC, for the 2027 Triennial Code Update Cycle. Today is July 16th, 2026, and today's meeting is scheduled from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We'll break roughly around noon for lunch. Today's meeting is available via Zoom and teleconference as noted in the workshop notice and agenda. This meeting will also be live streamed on the CBSC YouTube channel. Please be aware that the live stream has an approximate 45-second delay, and there's no method for offering verbal or written public comment. Closed captioning is available via Zoom's automated live transcriptions. To view closed captions in Zoom, click on the CC Live Transcript button. Closed captioning will automatically appear if you are watching via YouTube. The meeting materials may be viewed on CBSC's website as listed in the agenda. Now, Ms. Laura Mills will read the Zoom and telephone instructions.
Good morning, everyone. To avoid feedback or other technical issues, please join the meeting through one device only. Comments will be taken from the public in Zoom with their hands raised. If you wish to make a comment on a specific agenda item, please listen for Tim to ask for any comments from the public. At this time, please virtually raise your hand using the raise hand icon in Zoom, or if you're calling in from a phone, use *9 to raise and lower your hand. You will be recognized by me in the order your hand was raised and be given permission to speak. At this time, you will still need to unmute yourself to be heard. People on a phone should use *6 to unmute and remute themselves. When you are done speaking, please remember to lower your hand and mute yourself. If you like, you may announce your name and who you are representing before making your comment. Please be sure to mute yourself when done commenting. And keep in mind the 4-minute time limit for each individual speaker. Please ensure that you have a working microphone on or attached to your device before raising your hand to make a comment. I will continue through the queue until there are no raised hands remaining. When comments are complete, Tim will then proceed to the next agenda item. Please speak slowly and clearly so your comments can be transcribed. If you have any issues, please call the CBSC office at 916-263-0916. Thank you.
Does anyone have questions regarding the Zoom and telephone instructions?
Let's see. Okay, that's on this computer. No raised hands.
Okay, if there are no questions at this time, I'll proceed to the agenda items. Our first agenda item is introduction and workshop overview. I'd like to first invite BSC staff to introduce themselves. If anyone online would like to do so.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Irina Browse, supervising architect with the commission, listening and available for the right question. So.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Day. I'm Deputy Executive Director of the California Building Standards Commission. Good to see everybody.
No other raised hands.
Okay. We'll proceed to DSA staff introductions.
Morning, everybody. My name is Eric Drever. I'm Principal Architect here at DSA headquarters. And with me today is a portion of our sustainability team. We'll start with Alicia Chavez.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alicia Chavez, Supervising Architect for the Sustainability Unit here at DSA headquarters.
And I'm Ida Brown, Senior Architect with the Sustainability Unit here at DSA headquarters as well.
Good morning, this is Robert Martin, Senior Mechanical Engineer with Sustainability Unit of Headquarters DSA.
Ida Claire, State Architect.
Are there
That's
any other?
it. No other hands raised. Ida, would you like to be made a panelist so you can share your camera?
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Paul, would you introduce yourself as well?
I need Paul to raise his hand.
Paul, can you raise your hand?
There we go. Okay. Go ahead, Paul. We can't hear you.
Yeah, Bob Raymer with the Industry Coalition.
No other raised hands. Any other panelists want to? Is that where you're going next, panelists?
Yeah, at this time, I'd like to invite any new CCRC participant introductions. Just your name and affiliation only, please. Raise your hand if you'd like to do so.
Go ahead, Nicole.
Hi, my name is Nicole Ty. I'm with Reuse Alliance, and I'm just looking forward to hearing new things. I have a couple things I'd like to report about at some point when appropriate.
Thank you, Nicole. Anyone else?
No other hands raised.
Okay, I'll move on to agenda item 1C, which is goals, roles, and responsibilities. The goal of the CCRC workshop is to garner participation from all interested parties and affected stakeholders in the rulemaking process, to inform participants of the roles and responsibilities of the agencies, stakeholders, and the public, and to get informed, balanced input on CalGreen proposals. BSC has the authority to write CalGreen regulations for the built environment for non-residential construction not regulated by any other agencies. BSC is a regulatory agency and is not an advocacy group. As such, BSC is required to follow statutorily mandated procedures and proposed regulations within our scope of authority and consistent with state law. BSC seeks to co-adopt regulations with partner agencies. Insofar as each entity has distinct regulatory responsibilities and authority, not all regulations may be co-adopted. Each entity may develop specific regulations based on executive action, legislative mandate, or demonstrated need identified by BSC or proposed by others. BSC consults and may receive input from state agencies with subject matter expertise in green building standards. BSC is required by building standards law and the Administrative Procedure Act to evaluate the estimated private sector cost impacts and estimated benefits of the proposed building standards, among other things required to be included in Form 399 that we will discuss a bit later today. Lastly, BSC is not an enforcement entity. Enforcement is delegated to the local enforcement agency. I'd like to invite DSA to discuss your roles and responsibilities.
Hello, everyone. Alicia Chavez again. I'll be reading DSA's roles and responsibilities. Excuse me. DSA has the statutory responsibility and authority to write Cal Green regulations for the built environment for non-residential construction, including California public schools and community colleges. DSA is a rulemaking entity for public schools and community colleges. DSA is the plan, approval, and enforcement entity for public schools and community colleges. DSA is required to follow statutorily mandated procedures and propose regulation within their scope of authority and consistent with the state law. DSA develops regulations based on executive action, legislative mandates, or a demonstrated need identified by DSA or proposed by others consistent with statute regulated rulemaking. DSA consults and may receive input from state agencies with subject matter experts in green building standards. DSA is required by building standards law and the Administrative Procedure Act to evaluate the impact cost of proposed building standards on, including but not limited to, business, jobs, private persons, benefits to health, safety, and welfare, cost of compliance, estimated benefits, mandate on housing, local agencies, or school districts.
Thank you, Alicia. I'll move on to item D. Toward the end of the presentation, and we'll talk about the rulemaking timeline and how this could affect the data requirements from the stakeholders. Moving into agenda item 2, CCRC code change proposals from BSC and DSA. I'll start with a BSC recap of 2025 workshops. In 2025, BSC and DSA convened 3 CCRC workshops for the 2025 intervening code adoption cycle, attended by multiple state agencies and stakeholders. At the workshops, BSC and DSA presented possible CCRC proposals to be included in chapters 5, 8, and Appendix 5 of Cal Green. Several proposals were also presented by AIA California. The proposals presented were cleanup items such as errors in worksheets and units of measurements, specific definitions, BCCA carbon limits for insulation per SB 1207 statutes of 2024, raising the 175% threshold of GWP values to bring CCRC closer to BCCA levels, a carbon budget compliance path, circular economy, and others. Given the constraints of AB 130 on the rulemaking process, several of the amendments that were proposed were withdrawn for the intervening code update cycle, with the intent that they will be revisited in the current triennial code cycle. Now DSA will present proposals that DSA and BSC intend to co-adopt, as well as DSA only proposals. After that, I'll present BSC only proposals.
Oh. All right. Sorry, one moment. Hello, my name is Ida Brown, Senior Architect with DSA. Today, I will be walking you through the proposed revisions to the Cal Green mandatory non-residential embodied carbon requirements. Most of these revisions are proposed for co-adoption by both DSA and BSC, and they are included in the DSA Part 11 draft attachment A document, which was posted on both the BSC and DSA websites for public review ahead of this meeting. Throughout the presentation, I'll highlight selected excerpts from that document to illustrate the proposed changes. Deletions from the code language will appear with strike throughs and additions will be shown with underlines. I also want to note that the proposed updates shown here and in the DSA Part 11 draft attachment A document already incorporate the 2025 intervening code proposed changes. For clarity, they are presented as existing regulations. If approved, these updates will be issued on January 1st, 2027 and will take effect on July 1st, 2027. The first item in the document is definitions, though I'm going to go slightly out of order and hold off on definitions until we get to the section for which they are related to. This will help put them in context. DSA is proposing changes to scoping section 5.409.1 that BSC is not proposing to co-adopt. As a result, these changes will appear separately under the DSA banner. The proposed language in DSA's scoping section has been streamlined for clarity. It now states that projects with a combined new and/or altered building floor area exceeding the threshold square footage must comply with one of the available compliance options. This means that for projects involving multiple buildings with different scopes of work, the total new or altered building floor area, excluding any existing floor area that remains unaltered, must be added together to determine whether the project exceeds the required threshold. In addition, DSA proposes reducing the compliance threshold from 50,000 square feet to 25,000 square feet. This recommendation is based on building characteristics data from the 2018 Commercial Buildings Energy Consumption Survey, which shows that only 13% of buildings are larger than 25,000 square feet. Yet those buildings account for 65% of total building floor space. Targeting buildings over 25,000 square feet therefore provides the greatest reduction potential while affecting the smallest number of buildings. The survey also indicates that the average education building in the US is 31,100 square feet. So lowering the threshold to 25,000 square feet will capture the typical education building without placing unnecessary burden on smaller projects. DSA also proposes adding a requirement for projects with a combined new site concrete area of 5,000 square feet or more to comply with the GWP limits in table 5.409.3. This supports the intent of the section by targeting materials with the highest global warming potential for reduction. That concludes the proposed updates to the scope section. Are there any questions or comments?
I'm not seeing any hands raised. Oh, there goes one. Go ahead, Nicole.
I would just, I'm looking at the product GWP. Does this include reuse of materials, or it's not necessarily prescriptive in that manner?
Looking at the product GWP, or
Yeah, it's not part of it.
yeah, no, reuse materials is not part of the prescriptive options, I think is what you're talking about, the limits. That's a separate option. Reuse
Oh,
of-
okay. In a different area?
Right, you reuse of existing buildings is option one, and are you talking about the scoping section? I'm sorry, I'm not sure that I totally understand the question.
I'm just asking where, if reused materials, not reuse of buildings, is included in like product GWP later on, like as an option, like you can use reused materials, like is there
I see.
a
Well,
formula
there's
for using them?
Yeah, so salvage materials is included as an exception in both the prescriptive and the performance options as proposed.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Anything else? Anyone else?
Um, Maya White has her hand raised. Go ahead, Maya. Okay.
She's still muted.
Yeah, you'll need to unmute yourself, Maya.
Maya.
Hello?
There she is.
Yes, sorry. Could you repeat which values you're aligning to? Is it 100% of Buy Clean California for the prescriptive GWP limits? Or some other value?
So we're gonna discuss that later. This is just the scoping section.
I see.
That I've just presented, and it has to do with the threshold of, so buildings, to what square footage size building or project you would be subject to the requirements of the embodied carbon reduction.
Okay, thank you.
There are no different hands raised.
Moving on to table 5.409.3, this table presents the proposed adjustments to the GWP limits. Under this proposal, the limits would be reduced from 175% down to 125% of the BCCA and in our MCA levels. I also want to note that these updated limits would be based on the 2025 BCCA values, whereas the current limits reference the 2022 BCCA values. This proposed reduction to 125% is consistent with the proposal previously brought forward during the pre-cycle CCRC meetings in the 2025 intervening code cycle. That proposal was ultimately tabled following the passage of AB 130, delaying further consideration until the 2027 Triennial code cycle. Given this history and the later timing of the upcoming code adjustments, DSA is requesting feedback from stakeholders regarding the appropriate level of reduction moving forward. Are there any comments on the prescriptive GWP limits at this time?
If I could interject, we're going to have a public comment period towards the end of the presentation after the stakeholder presentations. So maybe we can hold off on public comments until that with the agenda.
Okay.
Just so the whole presentation is in front of them before they ask questions.
All right, well, if you'd like to hold your comments and questions until then, I'll keep going. Next, a quick note regarding flat glass. This update is not currently reflected in DSA's proposals posted on the BSE or DSA websites. However, this issue was previously brought up during the 2025 intervening code CCRC meetings, where concerns were raised about the effectiveness of the current flat glass limits. The challenge is that flat glass by itself is not typically used in building construction. Projects almost always rely on processed glass or insulated glass units. Because the current requirement applies only to flat glass, it has not been as effective as intended in addressing the GWP limits of the glass products actually installed in the buildings. Given the context, DSA is seeking input from stakeholders on how this issue would be addressed moving forward. We welcome feedback on the most appropriate approach and any considerations that should be taken into account as we evaluate potential next steps. This concludes the proposed updates to table 5409.3 and the product GWP prescriptive option. Next is section 5.409.3.1, verification of compliance. DSA is proposing an exception that for DSA projects, the required DSA form for prescriptive compliance shall be submitted in place of worksheet WS5. This is because DSA has its own verification form included with the DSA 403C, and that form is required for all DSA regulated projects. As a result, worksheet WS5 in CalGreen is not used for DSA projects. Section 5.409.4 covers the whole building life cycle assessment performance option. The proposed revisions introduce a carbon budget as a additional pathway alongside the current base building method. The upcoming presentation by CLF will provide a more in-depth explanation of the carbon budget. And as a note, DSA is seeking feedback on whether the carbon budget approach should eventually become the sole compliance method within the performance option, either in this code cycle or in the future one. This is an open question for stakeholders, and your input will help shape the direction of upcoming updates. Regarding the carbon budget, on the screen is a snippet showing how it is proposed to be integrated into the code language. Section 5.49.4.1 outlines the requirements for the carbon budget method, explaining how the embodied carbon intensity, ECI, is calculated, and introduces table 5.409.4.1, which lists the maximum acceptable embodied carbon budgets for each occupancy type. You'll also notice that a significant portion of table 5.49.4.1, as shown in red, has been revised since the draft posted on the BSC and DSA websites prior to the CCRC meeting. These updates were made in response to CLF comments submitted during the 2025 intervening code cycle. CLF emphasized that project teams should not perform an area-weighted average to determine a project's embodied carbon budget, nor should they combine multiple occupancy groups, because the data said that these embodied carbon budgets are based on already account for mixed-use types. To address that concern, DSA proposes expanding the table to list each non-residential occupancy group separately and adding 2 footnotes. Footnote 1 clarifies that the primary occupancy group is the occupancy classification representing the largest percentage of the building's total floor area. Footnote 2 clarifies that a building's embodied carbon budget must be embodied carbon budget associated with its primary occupancy group and must not be calculated using an area-weighted average of multiple occupancies. We also have proposed new definitions for embodied carbon intensity and embodied carbon budget. I'll walk through each of these briefly. Embodied carbon intensity, ECI, is defined as the total global warming potential of a building divided by its gross floor area, expressed in kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per square meter. Embodied carbon budget, ECB, is defined as an embodied carbon intensity value that serves as the maximum allowable limit for determining a project's compliance with embodied carbon reduction requirements, also expressed in kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per square meter. These definitions support the carbon budget framework, which again will be explained in greater detail during the upcoming CLF presentation. And with the addition of the carbon budget, the baseline building method has been separated out into its own section. Section 5.409.2, which retains most of the existing language with only minor updates for clarity. Also within the whole building life cycle assessment performance option, DSA is proposing an exception to exclude biogenic carbon from the calculation. Stakeholders recommended that clarification to ensure biogenic carbon is not counted as a reduction in the building's GWP, nor the base building model where applicable. The rationale is that biogenic carbon has a net zero contribution to global warming potential over the full life cycle of a building, and therefore including it would not accurately reflect embodied carbon impacts. I also want to note that the changes shown in red were not included in the version posted online. These revisions were made after reviewing comments from CLF submitted during the 2025 intervening code cycle. CLF recommended aligning our proposed definitions with the terminology expected in the forthcoming ASHRAE 240P standard. In response, DSA proposes updating the definition to improve alignment while still keeping the wording clear and understandable for architects and building code users, rather than using more technical scientific terminology. The proposed definition for biogenic carbon is greenhouse gas absorbed from the atmosphere by living organisms as they grow and then released back into the atmosphere through natural processes such as decomposition, but not fossilized or derived from fossil resources. Again, in section 5.409.4, DSA and BSC are proposing to remove note 1, which lists full building life cycle assessment software available to the public. Although the note is non-regulatory, keeping it in the code text could unintentionally imply that the authority having jurisdiction endorses, has evaluated, or prefers the listed software over other tools on the market. This is not the case, and removing the note avoids any misunderstanding or perception of bias. In section 5.409.4.3, building components, we are proposing a new subsection 5.409.4.3.1, which specifies that salvage materials and products shall have a GWP of 0 for life cycle stages A1 through A3. In other words, salvage materials do not contribute to the building's overall GWP calculation for those stages. This subsection also clarifies that what qualifies as a salvage material, using criteria similar to the exception that will be included in the prescriptive option for the 2025 intermediate code. Lastly, similar to the verification exception in the prescriptive method, DSA is proposing an exception in section 5.49.4.5 for verification of compliance. For DSA projects, the required DSA form must be submitted in place of worksheet WS4. This is because DSA already has its own verification form, including the DSA 403C form, and that form is required for all DSA regulated projects. As a result, worksheet WS4 in CalGreen is not used for DSA projects. That concludes the proposed updates for the whole building life cycle assessment performance option. And for that, I'll turn this back over to BSE.
Thank you, Anna. As DSA just presented, and as everyone can see in BSC's drafts express terms, BSC does not propose any changes to the scoping provisions for embodied carbon regulations under our authority, and the threshold will stay at 50,000 feet for buildings within this authority. As we're co-adopting the rest of DSA's proposals, again, except for the scoping provision changes and exceptions about worksheets that DSA proposes on their own. I'll go ahead and present BSC proposals in voluntary sections that BSC or DSA does not adopt. As DSA had mentioned in their presentation, they have worksheets specific to their projects and will no longer be co-adopting the worksheets in Chapter 8 of CalGreen. Worksheets WS4, WS7, and WS9 are to be used with the mandatory provisions as well as the voluntary appendices. Each of these forms have been revised to reflect the embodied carbon budget compliance method. Similar to table 5.409.3 and the mandatory provisions. Table A 5.409.3 and Appendix A5 has been adjusted to reflect utilization of ACCA GWP values for Tier 1 and Tier 2 voluntary measures. Tier 1 utilizes 100% of BCCA values, while Tier 2 uses 75% of the values. That's the extent of provisions being proposed in the voluntary appendices as well as the worksheets from BSC. At this point, I'd like to continue to agenda item 3. DGS procurement has an update on BCCA levels. Is somebody from procurement
Yeah,
I think it's Tony.
Wang.
on the Zoom? Okay.
Yep. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, thank you, Tony.
Morning. I am working on sharing my screen. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tony Wang. I am the Senior Procurement Engineer with Department of General Services Procurement. I oversee the Environmentally Preferable Purchasing Unit, and so we work on the Buy Clean California Act as well. So what is the Buy Clean California Act? The Buy Clean, or BCCA, states the Department of General Services, in consultation with the California Air Resources Board, is required to establish and publish the maximum acceptable global warming potential limits for 4 eligible materials. Those materials are structural steels, concrete reinforcing steel, also known as rebar, flat glass, and insulation. And these limits apply to any projects conducted by a state department that is under the State Contracting Act. On the right, I've included the current GWP limits that were released in January 1st of 2025. These limits are reviewed on a 3-year cycle, so we are due to update these limits on January 1st of 2028. So GWP is verified using a document called Environmental Product Declarations. These are put together by the product manufacturers. These documents are also written using rules that are determined in a product category rule, or PCR, and those are updated every 5 years. We recently had some updates to those PCRs for insulation and steel construction products. And within these updates, the major change has been the GWP which was previously reported as a single number, will now be broken out into 3 components, them being fossil, biogenics, and land use change. In addition to those changes, we also had some change to the BCCA legislation. Previously, we were only allowed to set limits for mineral wool board. This has been changed to a much broader insulation category. We're currently working on collecting data to set the new limits across a much larger product category, and we are planning on releasing that on the next update cycle on January 1st of 2028. There's quite a few considerations that goes into setting these limits. One is with the recent PCR changes, a lot of the EPDs will be reporting cradle to grave instead of cradle to gate. Just within the insulation category, there's a lot of variations in the products. So we need to have a strategy of addressing differences in the GWP of facers, different densities of insulation, form factors, etc., as well as the PCR that is being reported in the EPDs. Those are technically active for 10 years. So we want to make sure whatever limits that we set account for both the PCR that the EPD was written on and any new EPDs that come out that's written on a newer PCR. So that's the update for us on the BCCA program.
Thank you, Tony. Moving on to agenda item 4, AIA California and Carbon Leadership Forum, CLF, have a presentation they'd like to present.
Good morning. I'm just getting the video started here. On behalf of AIA California and our 11,000 design professionals that design and document, excuse me, nearly all buildings of scale, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present our recommendations today. My name is Simone Barth. I'm a principal at Mithun, and I'm the current chair of the AIA California Climate Action Steering Committee. My co-presenters today are Maya White-Turry, Liz Gruen, Brett Banky with the Carbon Leadership Forum, Luke Lombardi with Boer Happold, as well as Beth Solens with USGBC. As you can see in this slide, we are working with a broad range of stakeholders, bringing different perspectives to the code development of CalGreen. The specific technical experience and expertise from our industry partners was instrumental and informed the recommendations we are sharing with you all today. A proud milestone, our contributions to the embodied carbon measure implementation effective of July 2024. Embodied carbon is a big contributor to overall greenhouse emissions of the built environment. The time value of embodied carbon and the fact that emissions are released upfront are calling for measures that inform the early design and project development process. So when we are talking about the triennial, we like to suggest the logical and next steps that support the state of California's overall goals in reduction greenhouse gas emissions. We think that the 2024 measures were successful. The industry adopted it based on feedback received. The success was in the choice that was offered to the design professional, the 3 compliance paths, as well as the area was relatively high and requirements were achievable. So this is an interesting point to continue our journey towards overall greenhouse gas emissions, but also creating resilient and sustainable buildings. Our recommendations are organized in 4 categories today that will be presented by our subject matter experts. Number 1 is the embodied carbon compliance and potential adjustments to the prescriptive path. Number 2 is introducing embodied carbon budget as an alternative compliance method. And to be clear, we are not changing the 2-path model approach. This is just an alternate. Number 3 is the circular economy, getting CalGreen up to date, and supporting the overall reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, reduction of waste, but also promoting economy. And last but not least, there's a slight typo here, is CalGreen cleanup. As we add more materials, we think it's important to kind of prune the tree and make fine revisions. With this, I like to introduce our subject matter experts that will go into detail into all of these 4 kind of recommendation areas. And I call up Maya White that will cover the embodied carbon compliance.
Architect with Brian Associates and chair of the Embodied Carbon Working Group with EIA California.
Maya, we can't hear you really well. Can you get closer to your microphone possibly, please?
Yes, sure. Is this better?
Oh, way better. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide. All right, so we agree that the area thresholds should remain the same regarding embodied carbon limitations in this code cycle, although we support DSA's proposal that school projects be limited, become triggered at 25,000 square feet instead of, and that's something that in future code cycles, Building Standards Commission might adopt so that there's uniformity. But looking at the comparison between the whole building life cycle assessment path of compliance and the prescriptive path of compliance, we see that there's quite a discrepancy in the whole building carbon that would result via when you compare the 2 methods. If you could go to the next slide. Right, so because of that, we recommend adjusting the prescriptive standards from 175% of industry average to 100% or 100% of the Buy Clean California measures. We think that since our last presentation to BSC that the industry has evolved, and when we've done research, we see that there are plenty of products available on the market meeting our proposed goals. If you go to the next slide. So you can see in this slide, you can compare the current CalGreen embodied carbon of a project compared to what would be the average that we find in CLF studies for 2025. And it's substantially higher than average is what the prescriptive path currently proposes. And so the limits that we're proposing going to Buy Clean California 100% levels bring us more in alignment with what an average building's embodied carbon actually is. You can go to the next slide. So here are the actual GWP limits that we're proposing for the mandatory tier 1 and tier 2 levels. So 100%, 90%, and 85%. And it's broken down by each material type per BCCA. As insulation expands beyond mineral wool, we'd also advocate expanding standards for the prescriptive path limitations to align with the different categories that are included for insulation. Next slide. Here you can also see that we are proposing limitations on concrete that are in correspondence with average concrete values as shown in CLF reports and also in our MCA standards. Again, 100%, 90%, and 85% for mandatory tier 1 and tier 2. Next slide, please. We looked at each material type and compared it to CLF's 2025 reports for North America to ensure that there was an appropriate distribution and availability of EPDs on the marketplace that consumers, architects, contractors could turn to for material supplies. And we found that there was a more than adequate distribution for each product type. We support going to 75%, I think was tier 2 that BSC showed previously, although in the glass market that might be a bit of a challenge. I think there's the 2 major North American suppliers come out at about 87% of the current BCCA proposed limitation. And so for that, we made a minor deviation on glass to allow the 2 major manufacturers to still be considered. Finally, on the next slide, we agree that the loophole should be closed for processed glass, and that processed glass should be composed of flat glass. That's the prescriptive GWP limits. And so we recommend adding provisions to CalGreen to cover this. That concludes this section.
Next is Brad Benke with the Carbon Leadership Forum.
Yes, I'll be sharing some of our proposed approach for the embodied carbon budget pathway that's been mentioned a couple times already. So there are 3 current pathways. The building reuse pathway, where we simply show that you've reused 45% or more of a building. The prescriptive path, where you're using lower carbon products verified by EPDs. And the current performance path, which has you conduct a whole building life cycle assessment on both a baseline and proposed design to show a % reduction. We are not proposing that any of those necessarily need to change, but we are introducing a 4th optional pathway called the embodied carbon budget approach. This would be where a project's embodied carbon intensity must be below a specified level or budget as proven through a whole building LCA. And we think this option would save time and effort. It would be easier to enforce. It would provide flexibility moving forward and could be set up to still lead to equivalent decarbonization as the current performance path. Next slide, please. So embodied carbon budget is a maximum allowable embodied carbon threshold value for compliance. Typically, this is expressed as an embodied carbon intensity of a building, or it's measured in units of kilograms of CO2e per meter squared. So how you actually calculate this embodied carbon intensity metric is you perform a whole building life cycle assessment on your project, find out its total cumulative embodied carbon impacts, measure the floor area of that same project, and divide those 2 numbers. So in this case, 5 million divided by 10,000 would be a 500 kilograms CO2e per meter squared, or ECI building. So to comply with an embodied carbon budget, then that ECI number must be below a specified budget. Next slide, please. And how this would actually work is a project would then calculate their ECI and compare it to a predetermined budget that we have suggested values for in the following slides, and see if they are either already comply already, or they must reduce their impacts in order to comply. So in this case, all of buildings A, C, D, and F, they all calculated their ECI. It was below whatever the set value is. Whereas projects B and E, they got to look at their results and say, oh, we need to reduce our embodied carbon further to meet this target. Next slide, please. By doing so, those projects that are over the embodied carbon budget and make reductions to meet it are then creating a net embodied carbon reduction across the policy across California. Next slide, please. So the benefits of this option is very easy and simple. So in the current performance pass or baseline design approach, project teams have to create 2 different whole building life cycle assessments, one sort of a hypothetical baseline, the other of their actual building that they're proposing to build, and show that their proposed building is lower than the baseline building. So we completely eliminate the need to create that baseline whole building life cycle assessment model, and this saves everybody time and money, and it's much easier to review. This also helps because if projects already have mid to low impacts inherently, if they've either intentionally or accidentally created a lower carbon building, they're not required to reduce those impacts any further. It's also clear and predictable. Project teams can know exactly what the embodied carbon budget value is that they need to meet early on in design, and the method itself does not need to change over time, saving on training and retraining. However, it's also flexible and forward-looking. Once you have this framework in place, if you would like to make these targets more restrictive over time, it's easy to adjust them to align with whatever global climate targets or state climate targets or code adoption climate targets might exist. Next slide, please. The data that we're actually using to create values for the CalGreen recommendation comes from our whole building life cycle assessment benchmarking study that we completed last year in collaboration with the University of Washington. This had over 200 whole building LCAs of real world projects from late design to construction. We had really rigorous modeling and reporting requirements and data quality assurance checks, and it's the largest and actually the only database containing comprehensive and high resolution whole building life cycle assessment results of real world projects in North America. This data set was not available when CalGreen introduced the embodied carbon pathways in 2024, which is why it's now being introduced as an option, because we did not have sufficient data to be able to say what accurate or meaningful embodied carbon budgets would have been for those projects at that time, but we do now. Next slide, please. The way that we're proposing that different types of buildings have different embodied carbon thresholds or budgets is based on primary occupancy category. That would be the occupancy type that makes up the greatest share of a project's total gross floor area. Primary occupancy is something that's recorded on all architectural drawings that get submitted for code. So this is an easy way for code officials to pair appropriate embodied carbon budget targets with the building typology. The values that we're proposing at the required level are the 75th percentile of the data points for projects of equivalent types. Talk a little bit more on the next slide. And tier 1 and tier 2 values can also be introduced to align with the baseline design pathway reduction potentials, and we have a methodology for doing so. Thank you. So the 75th percentile, the way we chose that number is if you were to quantify all of the projects in our data set and say what would happen to each of these projects' embodied carbon intensity if we were to cap it at a certain value, and ones that are higher than that value have to reach that value, and all the ones that are currently below that value stay the same. We found that the 75th percentile of the data set, it creates an almost exact equivalent total net reduction of those projects as the current 10% reduction for the baseline design approach. As indicated here, there's also potential tier 1 and tier 2 values where we can closely match a 15% and a 20% reduction as needed for additional values. Also worth pointing out here that the 75th percentile means that 75% of projects on average are going to be below that threshold already. So we do think it's helpful to consider if certain people that adopt this option might want to make it more stringent, and we could provide values for that to happen. Also, no matter what the performance path reduction is set to, if the baseline design performance path values were to change, we can create similar outcome reduction targets using this data set. Next slide, please. To summarize, we think these recommendations are appropriate because they align with the intent and application of the current performance pathway. They're utilizing the best available data for embodied carbon impacts of projects in North America. This is incentivizing net decarbonization in parity with the current baseline design approach. They're achievable with minimal effort for the majority of projects. They're easy to understand and verify for both project teams and code officials, and this saves time, effort, and money compared to the baseline design approach. Lastly, these can easily be updated and improved over time without changing the overall process or framework. And lastly, this does not replace any current pathway, just adds flexibility and ease. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. And calling up Luke Lombardi.
All right. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Simone. So you can go ahead and hop to the next slide. My name is Luke Lombardi. I'm a structural engineer and sustainability consultant, current co-chair of the SC 2050 program, and I'm going to be representing our circular economy group. And we're talking about circular economy as kind of a logical progression of this embodied carbon topic. You know, we spent the last couple of sections talking about refining our process and setting limits on that carbon assessment. And it's also important to look at the take a step back and look at long term to evaluate the systems that we need to change to meet our ultimate goals. And circular economy is one of those that also has a lot of co-benefits today that I think make it resonate with a broader group of people, from providing affordable materials that have been salvaged, creating jobs from deconstruction, in addition to all the sustainability benefits. So affordability, jobs, carbon, I think it's something we all know is part of the long-term vision of building decarbonization. Next slide. And we're seeing this develop with policies across the country. So it's not a novel idea here. You can see mandated deconstruction in places like Boulder or San Antonio, deconstruction or salvage audits in New York City, guidance. Washington State allows lumber reuse. ICC has recently brought reused lumber into the code for 2027. So there's a lot of precedent. The point is that we can pull from and set best practice here in California. Next. So what we are recommending is really kind of in three groups here. First is kind of foundational, where we want to add some definitions to enable or make consistent kind of some of the other recommendations. We have some clarifications that we want to make clear within the prescriptive and performance pathways that enable reclaimed or reused materials. And then we have some broader kind of discussion topic items around what precedents can we pull from across the country that could be good starting points for our own REACH code. So we'll get into that. Next slide. First off, with the definitions, I think there's not too much to be debated here. There's plenty of precedent to pull from now from groups like LEED or ISO or other standards. There is some sometimes some conflated terms in the circular economy sphere around reuse or recycling and what we're defining. So it's just important that we get these kind of documented and written down so people are working from the same definitions. Next slide. Simona, looks like it froze on my end.
Yeah.
My apologies. Just give me a moment, please. Sorry.
I can dive into it just to keep the things rolling here. So we have clarifications within the existing pathways for allowing salvaged materials. The kind of pitch around this is salvage is thinking of it as sort of near zero. This is certainly not in fact like true definition. There's a heavy asterisk around this because there are still carbon emissions whenever we have to transport or remanufacture things, but we know them to be lower than generally first principles, lower than new materials. So the idea being, in the prescriptive path that we waive the EPD requirement, and in the performance whole building LCA, we allow for omission of manufacturing emissions for A1 through A3 as simplification, while there's some lag time for data around reused material EPDs to develop. So still incentivizing this pathway and not holding it up because of some technicalities. So the last three here are sort of just as a starting point. And the first of that is recommending a salvage audit. This is something that has started to be required either in the municipality level in certain places where effectively you walk the building site that's being demolished and you catalog the products that are available. And the idea would be you can make these public and the they could be reclaimed or used. It's sort of a first step to know what materials are being demolished or could be made available. Critical to this is like the documentation piece and finding making a visible reuse market, but it stops short of requiring deconstruction. So next step, we see this could potentially go into potential places either as a a template for reach code in tier 1, which would be our preferred place, or as an elective, which effectively would make it optional for at any time. Next slide, I'll hop right to the second recommendation, which I think is the next progression of this. Once we talk about it and establish the materials that could be deconstructed, the two things that we want to do in parallel is actually require some deconstruction, and the way we see that, there's also precedent that's been set at the local level, but it's important not just to drive the supply of those materials, but also the demand. So we're recommending that an expansion to the kind of waste diversion to discern and not be agnostic between reuse and recycling. There's a lot to discuss here, more than we have a few minutes today, but that's kind of a starting point. And I think we know this is required. There's already a section in CalGreen for deconstruction. We're just sort of imploring the group to kind of start that process. And I think that's it. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Luke. And calling up Bess.
Great, thank you all. I'll be the last here to round out our group, and just a few quick slides on a perennial topic of ours, which is some cleanup of CalGreen. As we know, the codes tend to grow but not trim, and we want some outcomes, not necessarily extra process. And users, we hear constantly, they want simplicity and expediency when learning the new code updates and things like that. So as items are added over time, we think there should be some effort to trim obsolete or unnecessary items, as well as measures that are now mature and are required by statute and other things. Perhaps they're ready, the time is now to move them to the other code sections where they might be more relevant, such as the California Building Code, plumbing, etc. This is not a backtracking. We're not saying cut these things out of the codes at all. It's just, on the contrary, making space for these newer high priority items, especially around embodied carbon. And we can make room for some of these urgently needed updates by refreshing CalGreen. I see in the last intervening code cycle that there's already a little bit of this work done, which is great. We're happy to work with you on more. There are some examples on screen here of things we might consider simplifying or streamlining, and again, moving things to other code sections if that's possible to do. Things like water conservation fixtures, the plumbing code, and filter requirements to the mechanical code, etc. And we have a table of some suggested things. We're going to refine this into a top 10 or 15 list, and would love to work with the state agencies on these priorities for making room in the code for these great embodied carbon updates. That's it for me.
Thank you, Bess, and thanks to my fellow co-presenters. Just a quick reminder of our 4 recommendations: adjustment to the prescriptive path in the embodied carbon compliance, introducing the embodied carbon budget as alternative, introducing circular economy, and the CalGreen cleanup. And with this, I'd like to hand it back and open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone, and each of the speakers for your presentation. We'll move on to agenda item 5, which is industry coalitions, comments, and suggestions. Bob.
Okay. Okay, can you see the presentation?
No.
Oh, great. Hang on. Now, can you see the presentation?
Yes, thank you, Bob.
Thank God. Okay, by way of introduction, I'm Bob Raymer. I'm representing the Industry Coalition. It's made up of 4 associations: California Building Industry Association, the California Apartment Association, the Building Owners and Managers Association, and the Business Properties Association. And what we're asking for here is an embodied carbon reduction exemption request. It may not be all that important right now, but down the road, it certainly will become. And so by way of background, if you go back in time, AB 1092 was the Levine legislation that required both the Building Standards Commission and HCD to develop and implement the first set of EV charging regs. Those took effect in 2015, I believe in July. And they included exceptions for when compliance was infeasible or when compliance would adversely affect the project's construction cost. Over a decade later, these exemptions still remain in the code and ensure compliance is not required when it would be infeasible or result in significant cost impact. And I'd like to point out that initially, when we had, let's say, HCD had the 3% rule, where 3% of the parking spaces multifamily had to comply, this wasn't used, quite frankly. However, now that we're at, effectively a 100% level for multifamily, we are running into instances where the local jurisdiction cannot supply capacity. In most of these cases, you can point directly to the location of AI data centers. We're going to have to learn how to balance all of that stuff out. But down the road, 10 years later, it was important that they were there. Okay, in the same manner allowed for EV charging stations, we feel the BSC carbon reduction standard should include an exception. Once again, when compliance is infeasible or would result in significant cost impact. We feel this is reasonable and it also aligns with the mandate established under AB 2446. That's the bill that passed in 2022 that directed ARB, Building Standards Commission, the CEC and HCD to work together to come up with a framework for doing what we're doing. In years to come, we feel that the square footage trigger for embodied carbon reduction is going to get smaller. Right now, it was at 100,000, now it's down to 50,000, and it's probably going to get lowered for that. Just as the percentage of mandatory carbon reduction is most likely going to increase. So we feel the inclusion of reasonable exceptions ensures the balance between California's environmental goal and the need to prevent a significant economic impact on those regulated. Now, I'm not going to cover all of this. What I've done here is create sort of generic exception that's based on the same exception that we have for EV charging on a case-by-case basis, where it can be shown to the satisfaction of the local enforcing agency that compliance would not be feasible or result in a significant cost impact. Compliance would not be required. Now, in addition, I've added in this particular one the definitions out of AB 2446 for feasibility and for significant cost impact. And I can tell you, as a longtime code user, these are ridiculously long definitions. What I've done, and I didn't want to take liberty with the content of AB 2446. That is probably something that should be left up to this group and the Building Standards Commission to decide. There are numerous things here that could be consolidated, reduced, worded differently, but I just wanted to present to the group, this is effectively the definitions out of 2446. Now, in this option 1 that I've given, the benefit of this is that it has the definitions immediately following the exception. That way, these definitions can't be Misinterpreted as applying to all of Cal Green. It applies to the embodied carbon reduction provisions. Now, in the next one, option 2, which we would prefer less, we have the same language for the actual exception, but this time around, the definitions of feasibility and significant cost impact are placed in Chapter 2, Section 202, where we keep all the definitions. The downside of that is, once again, these could be misconstrued to apply to all sorts of stuff in Cal Green, not just the embodied carbon. And lastly, the third option, which is absolutely the least preferred, we have the same exception language on a case-by-case basis, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have a note saying, for the purposes of this section, see Health and Safety Code, section 38561.3 E1 and E2 for the definitions of feasibility and significant cost impact. While accurate, as a code user, it's horrible when the state tells you to go to look at the public resources code, the water code, or in this case, the health and safety code. Building officials, code users don't carry the statutes around. But these are different options on how to deal with this. Now, I know given the application of the EV charging standards, there's certainly going to be a lot of blowback on this. I'd like to just state that the legislature and the governor wanted these agencies, the 4 that I mentioned earlier, to set up the framework for embodied carbon reduction, including a certified assessment of embodied carbon, a series of mandatory reductions in embodied carbon content over a reasonable period of time, to get the state to where it needs to be to meet its goals. And lastly, it included reasonable guardrails that I'm suggesting here that provide an exception when compliance was either infeasible or resulted in significant cost impact. In our view, if the BSC had adopted a regulation that only required a certified carbon assessment, but did not include a mandate to reduce the buildings in embodied carbon, numerous groups would have been rightfully upset. And so what we're saying here is, just as you're doing the first 2 directives of the legislature, we're requesting that you follow up with the third and set up some guardrails. Once again, if you maintain the square footage at 50,000 and the reduction at 10%, I don't see these being used right away. But as you reduce that square footage or increase the amount of carbon reduction, this is definitely going to play a role down the road. So with that, that's our request. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Speaking for BSC, we're not averse to the idea and we'll consider it, but we will need to further coordinate with you before the second CCRC workshop to come up with a workable language.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I would not suggest using what we've got there. Those are very long definitions, and you could do the same thing with a much shorter language. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Bob. With that, we'll move to agenda item 6, which is opening the floor for discussion of agenda items 2 through 5. If anyone has any comments or would like to discuss, please raise your hand.
Great. Go ahead, Gail.
Hi, thank you. Gail Napel. I am a many decades elder slightly practicing still architect. I have a question on definitions, and it may have been in there and I missed it. Would you consider adding design service life to the definitions? The reason that I ask that is it's something that's absolutely included in an LCA, but in my experience as practicing architect, I have seen that many architects do not know what it means and do not select a design service life for their project, which impacts the overall embodied carbon study, Because if you're designing a building and you really only intend it to exist for 15 years, the embodied carbon impact is very different than a building that you design with the intent for it to last 50, 60, 100 years. So it's just a request to include that definition to help continue to clarify that for practitioners.
Thank you, Gail. We can definitely consider that.
Next up is Hafsa.
Hi, so I do understand this is Hafsa Bird with HBA Architects. I'm also part of the Calgreen Collaborative. I just wanted to say that I do understand the concerns about cost implications, but RMI has done a really intensive study, and with case studies of buildings like a 200,000 square foot mid-rise concrete and steel construction, identifying that the cost premium of a low embodied carbon building would be only 0.5% of the total budget, while reducing the embodied carbon to 46% below baseline. So I'm happy to share those, but this does come up, and we do understand the concerns, but there have been case studies done just to show what the actual impact, and it's usually not more than 1%. And the industry is moving well in the direction. Manufacturers are ahead of us.
Thank you, Hafsa.
Next hand raised is Nicole.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Nicole Ty with Reuse Alliance, and I just wanted to reiterate what Luke Lombardi was talking about. He mentioned it earlier in his presentation that salvaged lumber has been adopted by the International Building Code. It is now going to be in Chapter 23 wood of the 2027 code. And with that, the presentation that he gave about the circular economy, it really will matter now to have some sort of assessment and deconstruction language going forward to, call attention to this, and also to allow people to make plans early on in the process to incorporate salvage lumber into their projects. So it's pretty exciting that this happened on a national level, and just wanted to point that out so you can take a look when you have a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.
Go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, there's my camera. I was going to ask the state agencies, DSA, I really appreciated your presentation and like a lot of the ideas about reducing the threshold, et cetera. Is that something that the BSC team is also looking to incorporate as a potential updates for this code session, like coordinating those changes? Or, yeah, just curious what the BSC is thinking on those changes as well. Particularly the lowering the threshold to 25,000 square feet, for example.
Right. We're not considering going further in this cycle due to a lack of data confirming the same availability and cost of materials. We will consider it in future cycles.
Is that something that this group could help with in terms of gathering that data, or helping build the case for some of those things?
Absolutely. We would solicit any data and information that you can provide.
Great.
Thank you, Wes.
Maya. Maya, you're muted. Try again. Sorry, ma'am. You just unmuted and then I was trying to help you. Go ahead. Okay, try again. Okay, we're gonna.
Hello.
There you
Sorry.
are.
I was wondering whether BSC is also looking at lowering the GWP limits via the prescriptive path of compliance with embodied carbon, because at the moment it is easier to comply via the prescriptive path than the whole building life cycle assessment route. And we, as Hafsa said, we do see that it isn't necessarily more expensive to make a lower carbon building. So we worry about carve out of exceptions being made where the development team sort of gives an example, oh, it's a lot more expensive, but really if you just sort of changed your design, material selection, structural system selection, it wouldn't be more expensive. So just go ahead.
Yeah, similar to what I commented on with Wes, we would solicit your input and look forward to continuing the conversation with CLF and could possibly be amenable to.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Neil, Eric.
Thank you. This is Eric Traver. I'm in the room. I have a question perhaps for the Carbon Leadership Forum, AIA group, clarifying and follow up to Wes Solon's question about lowering the threshold. Early on, I believe it was Simone, and I made a note of writing it down, mentioned that you agreed that the limits should remain the same, and I might be paraphrasing a little bit, but should remain the same, but support the lowering of the threshold to 25,000. I'm not really clear what exactly that means, and I don't mean to underscore it, but in the same statement, you're agreeing with 50,000, but supporting 25,000. So I'd just like to maybe clarify what it is your groups are supportive of and would recommend.
Yeah, Brad, do you want to speak to that?
I think somebody else should speak to that.
I can
Yeah,
speak to
Maya.
that.
Okay.
If you're able to hear me. It's
Yeah.
20, we support 25,000 square feet for DSA school projects, but 50,000 square feet for other commercial projects falling under the BSC's jurisdiction.
Thank you for that clarification. And then the next question, if I might, since I have the floor. Wes also had asked BSC if they were considering lowering the prescriptive down to 100% as proposed. I believe we had presented 125,000 square feet in our proposals. And there's also been some statements that you believe there is little additional cost to going to 100%. Speaking on behalf of TSA, we would be interested in seeing the data that supports those claims, so that the proposals could be appropriate. Of course, we have to justify it through our 399 process, economic and fiscal impact statements. And so any data associated to lowering of the thresholds, whether to 125 or to 100, would be appreciated.
Maya, I would say that's your turn too, but we can provide you the data.
Okay, so yes, we can send along with this present research to show cost implications for selecting materials and systems that would comply with the 100% standards and the delta of what that might be.
Thank you, Maya.
Luke, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I have just a point on while we're talking about the prescriptive numbers, and flag that the current concrete limits point to the version 3 NRMCA numbers. And just looking at those are published from back in 2022, they're quite old. And just a flag to the group that I think the anticipated version 4 is to be published sort of imminently. We probably connect with NRMCA on that, but just a flag that, as this sets the limit for, years to come, that probably want to use the latest data.
Thank you.
Gail?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And a follow-up question on that, it just vis-a-vis prescriptive requirements. And we all know that the whole climate and carbon issue is existential. And events are happening faster than codes can keep up, than the code cycle can keep up. I am so excited by the proposed changes that you have here. California tends to be quite progressive. But have you or would you consider as agencies looking at a more adaptive code method that can allow for updates as changes happen, because a 3 and 5 and 7 year code cycle is not allowing us to keep up with the pace of climate change? So is that something that would be discussable? And if so, how would we as people who are proponents of that advocate for it?
That would be something that we would have to collaborate on and discuss again before the second workshop. Everything that we propose needs to be justified with, as Eric had stated, a Form 399, which is the fiscal and economic impact, and needs rationale in our ISO, our initial statement of reasoning. But I solicit you to reach out to us directly, and we can consider your proposals and see what we can do to accommodate that.
Thank you for considering it, and I will reach out. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll come out a little bit on this, and certainly Kevin, I know he's on the line as well. I will say that the building standards adoption process is rooted in statute and health and safety code. The Building Standards Commission does a really very good job of managing that process. I can say by example from experience that the code cycle, while seemingly long, is amazingly fast. Just by way of our current date and schedule, we are in the pre-cycle. This is technically a pre-cycle activity for the 2027 code cycle. While, as evident in our presentation, our proposals for the 2025 have yet to be adopted. So there is overlap between the cycles. There's been recent legislation that limits building standards and other proposing agencies' ability to adopt substantive changes to the code during the intervening cycle. And so it really further limits substantive comments strictly to the 3-year cycle. And you're right that in terms of technology and climate adaptation strategies, those are very fast moving, but a change to the code cycle process would mean a legislative change. Building Standards Commission, of course, as is DSA, is part of the executive branch, and we simply follow the laws that are provided by the legislature and the governor. We do have some flexibility in acting to adopt regulations through executive action, but in the code cycle is rooted in statute. Those are dates that must be followed and would require a legislative change that you should approach your legislature regarding.
Oh, Go ahead, Irina. Not hearing you. I see you're unmuted.
Oh, can you hear me now?
There, yes, ma'am.
Okay, yeah, I forgot to move my mic. Sorry for that. So yeah, adding to what Eric just told, yes, we are following the process established in the law, and changing that process is I don't think it's achievable. So we are moving on 3-year cycles with substantive changes. And depending on what you mean by more adaptive regulations, I mean, that can be a number of things. Some can be achieved through regulations, and some are not achievable through regulations that would require legislative changes. So yeah, get back to us with what exactly you have in mind by that more adaptive regulations term, and then we'll see if it can be achievable through regulations. We'll consider it. Probably not this cycle, maybe some other future cycles. So yeah, get back to us and we'll see what can be done within the boundaries of the rulemaking cycle.
Thank you, Irina, and thank you, Eric, for the elaboration.
There are no other hands raised.
Are there any final discussion items that anyone would like to bring up regarding agenda items 2 through 5?
Robert?
Is there gonna still be a comment period at the end?
Yes, there's going to be another agenda item for items not on the agenda.
Okay, sorry, I'll wait till the end.
Thank you, Robert.
Charlie?
Hi, this is Charlie Ray with the California Construction Industrial Materials Association, trade association for ready-mix concrete producers, among others. And I just, without necessarily specifically commenting on anything, I just wanted to remind that, you know, when it comes to concrete, that there's a lot of exciting things that are happening, a lot of things that a lot of individual projects, materials that are out there that are, you know, helping to achieve a lot of lower carbon. But there's some ifs too. A reminder, you know, concrete is produced locally, roughly 400 plants around California. So there's a lot of variability in what can be achieved as far as what materials are available, what their quality is, you know, how they affect the final product, even just, you know, accessing the materials to have them in storage, to have the air permits to store them or use them, which can take years. So just kind of reminder on that front. So thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Give everybody a second, see if anybody else wants to raise their hand. And seeing none.
Okay, seeing none, I'll advance to agenda item 7, which is a more general discussion of items not on the agenda. Robert, if you'd like to raise your hand again. Thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
All right. Just make sure you guys can hear me.
Yes, we
I'm
can.
gonna have to overcome the noise that just started in the background. I wanted to respect everyone's time today, and I realize that this is not the forum for what I'm about to say. But I am embarking on a new mission in my life to hopefully sort out some of the beliefs we have versus what is reality. And all of my research that I've poured into my studies since I graduated from the University of Oregon with my post-professional degree in 2008, I first discussed on this topic with a co-presenter who brought to my attention that when they did a study and shut down a bunch of coal-fired power plants in a local area, that the local area actually heated up unexpectedly. They were actually trying to prove global greenhouse gas theory, and it ended up disproving a lot of our notions. And we need to rethink our political agenda with regards to global warming potential before we go down this path of destruction and profit. I can full stop here if you guys would like, or I can go on to elaborate.
You have a 4-minute time limit for your comments if you'd like to continue briefly.
Robert, this is Eric Drever with TSA. Are your comments related to the carbon reduction proposals?
Yes, in particular that we need to lobby politicians to change the metrics of what we're chasing, because I believe we're chasing the wrong metric.
I understand. I would suggest that this is not a political lobbying forum, that it is designed to propose and hear comments on related topics. If this is a political lobbying statement, then I would suggest that the legislature might be the appropriate forum for such.
It is, but with all due respect, I'll just keep it short. This entire thing is based on global warming potential and carbon reduction. Carbon reduction should not be the goal, because there has been, and if you go back to 1800, yes, we've doubled the amount of carbon. There has been 100 times more carbon in the atmosphere. So the greenwashing is real, and I'll leave it at that, sir.
Thank you for your comment, Robert.
Thank you, Robert.
There are no other hands raised.
Okay, seeing none, I will advance to agenda item 8, which is action items and future meetings. Today's workshop is the first CCRC workshop of this code cycle update. We have a second workshop for CCRC that's tentatively scheduled for September 24th. BSC and DSA will consider the comments and discussions heard today, and will present any adjustments to what we have presented. Opportunities for further public input will be available during the Code Advisory Committee meetings, as well as the subsequent public comment periods. I'm going to share a timeline infographic if I can. The fixed timeline is shown on the infographic being displayed. As you can see, Part 11 initial rulemaking documents are due to CPSC on February 1st, which means all the documentation has to be completed by mid-December at the latest. DSC and BSC need to route the documents through internal DGS review before the official submittal date. What that means is that we need to provide data for the Form 399 and ISOR that were previously discussed before the second workshop. That's an action item for stakeholders. You've made your proposals for adjustments in some of these amendments, and we solicit your input on data for the ISOR and the fiscal and economic impact statement on the 399. Data about GWP limits to substantiate proposals to go closer to BCCA limits, cost, availability, ISO reasoning, etc. And the same about the carbon budget. With that, if there's nothing else, we'll move to agenda item 9, which is adjourning the meeting.
I do not see any hands raised.
Okay, thank you everybody for attending, and I would invite you to sign up for our respective listservs to receive updates about upcoming workshops and other meetings. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.